when it comes to astronomy in general, 99% of the information that we get is from light that we collect from space, right? That's which isn't just the visible light that we see when we, switch on a light bulb, but infrared light, X-ray light, the whole spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum. Um, but that's all we get, right? Other fields of science, you can go into the lab and put things under a microscope. You can measure them with a scale and a ruler. But with space, other than within our own solar system, we have collected just a little bit of actual physical data, or physical, material, but 99% of it is from light that we collect from space. And so astronomers, of course, have become, incredible experts at processing and interpreting and analyzing light.
Welcome to the Earth Mates podcast. Together, we explore how to find your path from climate anxiety to community action by asking, who are you? Because just like any relationship, that matters. So get ready to be raw and real, but also playful and silly with me, Chief Relationship Officer Amber Peoples, as we discover what's possible through the lens of the 5 Earth Archetypes. Curiosity and subscription buttons highly encouraged. Welcome, my friend. Today, as I record this session, we are at winter time here in the Northern Hemisphere. And since I am above the 45th parallel, we are getting some cold weather. In fact, colder than normal. Though my friend here, Bernadette, she is enjoying some Baja California. So you'll see some flowers and turquoise and beautiful things surrounding her. Sunshine. I don't know where you are, but I'm curious. Can you tap into it for a little bit? Perhaps it's the Northern Hemisphere, but it's 6 months from now and you're feeling that warm sunshine on you, even if you're in the Arctic. And so wherever you are, I would like you to take a moment with your breath and your body and your senses and just feel into what is it that nature is sharing with you? What is your environment giving you? And can you really listen and enjoy and honor that? And while you do that, I'm going to count to 5 quietly in my head. And here we go. Thank you. Now, I'm officially going to introduce our wonderful friend down there in Baja California, Bernadette Rodgers. We met recently at a Climate Reality Project get-together, and it's a leadership program run by Al Gore to support people in their use of skills to advance climate solutions. Well, we had a bunch of wine and cheese, and I was actually told, you got to talk to Bernadette. I'm like, cool. Who's Bernadette? And Bernadette comes on over, plops herself down. And what we got to talk about was our paths that led us to this moment. With her years as an astronomer, I was so intrigued by her path towards climate action and how it relied on working with people different than her. So today I'm excited to learn more about her evolution and share it all with you. And welcome, Bernadette. I am so curious to hear what is your version of that introduction and story.
Thanks, Amber, and thanks for inviting me to do this. This is exciting for me. It's my first time doing a podcast, so I'm excited. Um, and yeah, I'd love to talk about my story because it's been exciting for me. It's been quite an evolution. Um, I am a professional astronomer. I got a PhD in astronomy quite a while back now, and I worked for over a dozen years, almost 13 years in South America, in Chile, at Gemini Observatory. Fabulous job, beautiful place, wonderful country. Raised my 2 children there with my husband, um, and and then and well, I could go back farther and tell you more history, but we'll just start from there, I guess. Um, and as I there, well, I get I will go back just a little bit to say that even as I was a graduate student in the 90s, um, I actually taught global warming to in an introduction to astronomy class to students, which is really the first time, I guess, that I understood it myself, to be honest. But it was already something that was sort of academically known then. James Hansen had already spoken to Congress. We'd already had the first few COP meetings, the International Climate Conference meetings. They started in 92. So this problem of global warming was out there, but it still, I guess, for me at least, and I think for a lot of people, seemed very academic. It was something that we read about and we talked about, and climate scientists were studying it. Um, but it wasn't something that I felt was close to me in my life, and I feel like a lot of people felt that way. So anyway, I finished my PhD, went off to Chile, got this great job as a postdoc, ended up staying there, like I said, for over 12 years, and becoming the head of science operations at this observatory. Um, and the whole time, just sort of gradually getting more and more concerned about this problem of global warming and climate change. And so finally, I guess around 2000, well, it was 2009, um, I really decided that I needed to do more about this. I was worried. I felt that cognitive dissonance of knowing that something bad is happening out there and not paying attention to it, and not really doing what I felt like I needed to do. So then it still took a few more years, but when I first started doing activism work in 2010, and I could talk more about that if you're interested with in my first actions. But then it took until 2014 when my family, we all decided to move back to the United States, and we moved to Portland, Oregon, and that's when I really sort of dove in full time as a climate activist.
Awesome. So yeah, definitely just a celebration of honoring that life journey that you've been on, Bernadette, and the wisdom that is held in that evolution. And I would like to start a little bit back in your time as an astronomer. And within the sciences, I'm finding more and more astronomy is such a unique science because you still have hypothesis, you still have experiments, you still have um, targets that you're zeroing in on, but it's the types of questions being asked are they aren't even necessarily social science questions. They are almost mystical questions, is sometimes what I'm hearing, especially when we look at people that blend astrophysicism. It's asking questions like, why are we here? Where did we come from? What is the origin of life? And so I'm really curious, when you make the choice to get a PhD in astronomy and then get this amazing opportunity to be at this at the center for 13 years in Chile. What drew you to be so curious to dedicate a third of your life, your working hours, to really engage in this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, even that was an evolution. When I was in graduate school, I was an older graduate school student, and a lot of I was already in my 30s, and a lot of the graduate students that were in their 20s had come straight from undergrad, and they'd known since they were little they always wanted to be an astronomer. They fell in love with astronomy when they read star books as a baby, or whatever. Um, and that really wasn't so much the case for me. I've always been interested in space. I've always enjoyed math and science academically, and I was pretty infatuated with NASA. So I would say that my entry was really kind of through NASA rather than directly towards the astrophysics end of it. Um, I started my career as a computer scientist, actually. My undergrad was in computer science. I worked for IBM for a while, and I worked for at the NASA Ames Research Center in California for a while, which was really fun. It was really neat. I was doing programming for uh, experiments that would fly on the space shuttle or the space station. Um, and I also was interested actually in being an astronaut at one point in my early days of my career. That never materialized, but that sort of got me on this track towards wanting to get a PhD in astronomy and become an astronomer. Um, and then um, I love astronomy because of what you're talking about, because it's really a luxury and a privilege to work in this field, because you get to just have these big ideas that and or questions that not aren't always necessarily very practical. There's not always a lot of pragmatic uses for the information, but but they spark such curiosity and excitement and interest in people that it's always fun to talk to people about astronomy. As soon as you tell somebody you're an astronomer, their eyes just light up and they have a million questions. And um, usually it's like, stump the astronomer time, because they ask about something that they read in the paper and some story or some book that I have no idea about. So even the study of astronomy is so broad. Personally, I studied how stars form and how planets form around stars. So really neat and interesting area to study, but very different from like studying the origin of the universe and cosmology and how galaxies form and all that. So I was always sort of a little bit more closer to home, like looking at other solar systems and how the stars form and how the planets form. Um, but in the 90s was when we first discovered planets outside of our solar system. So that is something that like kids today are growing up with as a known fact that, I didn't have when I was a kid. And so that's really fun too. Like this idea that we now know there's thousands of planets out there around other stars. We always suspected it, but now we can actually, we still can't really see them usually, but we've advanced enough in our technology and in our knowledge of stars and space to be able to really try and understand what those planets might look like, what they're made of, how they work, which brings us back to our own planet, right? And how amazing and unique our planet is. We still haven't found anything else very similar to the Earth. Um, and It's yeah. I think that it was kind of a roundabout route to for me to get into astronomy. But once I got there, I just really fell in love with the beauty of it, the fun of looking at these incredible images, and then the science side of it is really trying to understand them, the astrophysics and doing the calculations and figuring things out. But for me, I'd like to also step back and just remember like the big picture, the big idea, what's interesting about this and why is it so cool. And then, that's where most of my interest in astronomy and love of astronomy comes from. And then when I worked at this observatory, it was really great because um, this Gemini observatory does what's called Q observing, which means that as the employees of the observatory do most of the observing. So it's sort of a service observing style. So the astronomers from all over the world that are awarded time, request time, and get time to use the telescope don't actually usually come to the telescope. They get their data, over the internet. And so those of us that actually worked at the observatory have this incredible privilege to go to the top of the mountain, see the night sky, see the incredible views. It's a really fabulous place to work. And then take data for other people. So I ended up observing all different kinds of things, not just my own field. So I would study distant galaxies or um, the moons of Jupiter, or exploding stars, or all different kinds of things. You never knew, what might be in the schedule that night. So that was really fun.
Oh, I really love how you painted a picture with your description there. I find that really fascinating with how you're talking about this field of science is kind of along that almost storytelling, imaginative style. Because all fields are creative. We're all creating something new. But I do think this imagination piece tends to be more in that realm of the mystic or the artist. And I really love how you showed how that's such a central part of your experience of astronomy. And I'm curious, as you're looking at these planets that you said you literally can't see, so you have to imagine it. You have to imagine them, but you're imagining them with data, with measurements. I'm wondering how does that work for you? Because I think about, as I try to imagine, how do I imagine? It's not I I I don't see it in facts and figures and data per
Yeah,
se. So I'm curious how you do that, like how you form an image of a planet in your mind that we don't have pictures of to prove, but you have this information coming at you, helping you imagine it. How do you do
right.
that?
Yeah. Um, I guess it is the science brain that can sort of read a graph or read data, more than just like seeing the numbers. You can actually interpret that in real time, and see something there. So when it comes to planets, the when it comes to astronomy in general, 99% of the information that we get is from light that we collect from space, right? That's which isn't just the visible light that we see when we, switch on a light bulb, but infrared light, X-ray light, the whole spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum. Um, but that's all we get, right? Other fields of science, you can go into the lab and put things under a microscope. You can measure them with a scale and a ruler, but with space, other than within our own solar system, we have collected just a little bit of actual physical data, or physical, material, but 99% of it is from light that we collect from space. And so astronomers, of course, have become, incredible experts at processing and interpreting and analyzing light. Um, and when it comes to extrasolar planets, we can't see them because they're relatively small, dark bodies that exist very close to bright stars, right? If you look at our solar system, for example, um, a, a being on another planet around another star looking at our sun would never see our Earth or Venus or Mars, maybe Jupiter, but because they're just too close to the star and they're too small and dark. And so what we do is we collect light mostly from the star, and then use that to interpret these to discover these planets around the star. And the things that we can learn are the orbits, how long it takes the planets to go around. So we know the length of their year, we know how far they are from the star. Um, and then we can determine um, their mass. So you get an idea of, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you can determine also their size. So then you can get an idea of the density, whether they're like, heavy iron planets, or light gaseous planets like the big planets in our outer solar system, Saturn and Jupiter, um, or whether there's a whole category that are called water worlds, which are kind of the closest thing to Earth planets, which again, we don't see the planet, we don't see the oceans, but we can determine the size and the mass and the distance from the star, so that we can get an idea of the density, whether they might have a lot of water on them, and also the temperature, whether it's ice or gas or liquid. So, it's really just this, you know, spy story, right? This investigative thing where you have to like piece together all these little bits of information and then figure out what that's telling us. And we've gotten pretty good at it, especially over the last couple of decades now that we've discovered thousands of stars, of planets around other stars. And we have discovered this whole category of what are called super Earths, because they're usually much bigger than our planet, and water worlds where it looks like there's a lot of ocean or water on the surface of these planets. So that's how, and then other people besides myself go even farther to actually like draw pictures of what they might look like and things like that. Um, but yeah, we're piecing together these bits of information and trying to form an image.
Yeah, I love that you said that astronomers are essentially experts in light. Like that is a title. It's like the best tagline I've heard in a while. I love that.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time analyzing the light all across the spectrum.
And I love why, if with your focus being on planets, they say that you would move from looking at planets all around the world, or not the world, that's totally the wrong way to say it, all around the
The galaxy.
universe, the galaxy, um, to really looking at the world that we live in, the world that literally, when we look at the Greek root of eco, is home.
Mm,
Um, that that and especially as we look at what used to be called global warming, my understanding is that now has shifted across the board to climate change. Though
hmm.
you might have better insight on that than I do. Is it is an issue of light in a lot of ways, and light's reaction to carbon, and carbon ability, or how it interacts with light and blankets light and traps light and its heat and its source, and
That's right.
that that's such a that makes so much sense why there's connections there for you.
Right. And I call it light, which I think makes it easier to relate to because people, think about light because it's such a big part of our lives. Um, but in the broadest sense, right? And in that sense, this thing, the electromagnetic spectrum, is also energy. It really, light is energy. It's their kind of, that's interchangeable. And so you're right. The problem of global heating and climate change is an energy imbalance when it comes down to it on our planet. And it has to do with the radiation or the light or the energy coming from the sun and then being trapped by the carbon pollution in our atmosphere, which is what's heating up the surface. And so that imbalance is, yeah, directly related to the light we're getting from the sun, and then how that the whole way the planet works, right? The whole biosphere, the whole ecosystem on the really macro scale of, like, if you think of the Earth as a box, as a machine or something, how that operates, um, is very much a balancing thing. Earth is nature in general is amazing at finding balance, right? And so um, energy balance is what keeps our planet at a constant temperature or within a small range of temperatures. And what's happening now with global heating is that the Earth is seeking a new balance, and it's going to be at a higher temperature because we've changed the atmosphere. And so, yeah, it's very much about light and about energy and radiation. And I use all three of those terms kind of interchangeably. There's slight distinctions between them, but not a lot. The electromagnetic spectrum is an energy spectrum. Um, and so, yeah, that is what global heating is. And um, that's sort of, if you want to be technical about the terminology, the underlying thing that's happening is this energy imbalance which causes global heating, and then the consequences of that heating is the climate change, which is the term that most people use now because it just encompasses so much more than just the temperature, as we now know. And it's very obvious there's, all these effects of that change in temperature, which are the weather systems and the floods and the storms and the droughts and, all the different manifestations of that changing climate. But I do, yeah, to go back to, the astronomer's connection to that, I think um, when I give talks about climate change, I often start with a picture of the planet, right? And talk a little bit about my background, because I do think having that real macro view of our home as a planet, as this massive organic, operating machine, um, for me at least, puts it in perspective. It helps us understand that we're just a small piece of this amazing system of our biosphere. And unfortunately, we've sort of become a really dominating piece now because of our actions over the last many decades. But we are still just part of this big ecosystem, and the earth is still bigger than we are. And so there's a lot of potential there for nature's natural resilience to help us get back to a balance that is livable. But we really need to do our part to um, stop pushing it out of balance.
Mm-hmm. And that I would love to now shift kind of into this evolution that you really had starting in 2014, where you moved from what kind of sounds like, in a lot of ways, following your bliss. Like you had, the computer science, and then NASA, and then Chile. Like it sounds like this amazing journey of, if you follow that, you're gonna, be in the right direction for where you should be. But I think the emotional baggage that's around climate change is not one of bliss. It's one of a lot of challenging emotions like grief and perhaps even guilt. And so I'm wondering, with this shift, clearly you have the knowledge, this really amazing in-depth knowledge from this planetary system way of understanding the world, and how all of that data really matters when it comes to something that so many of us, it may be even hard to grasp the size of it. As you're facing this information, what was it that made you make this big change in your life in 2014 to become an activist for the climate?
Yeah, it was a combination of things, of course, but there was, I would say, a a trigger, an event that happened for me. Um, I moved to Chile in 2001. My career was going along very well. I loved my job. We loved where we lived. Um, and but I was, getting more and more concerned, sort of a click activist, as people say, reading a lot, clicking on things, liking on Facebook, maybe signing a petition or something here and there. But very much sort of just, uh, yeah, a one finger on the mouse type activist. Um, and in 2009, um, I was attending a science talk at the observatory, and at the time, there was a new observatory being built, which was in a 747 aircraft. And so it was built by NASA. It operated for several years. It's now been decommissioned, but it's called SOFIA. It was a stratospheric observatory for infrared astronomy. And um, basically a 747 airplane with a big telescope in the side, and it would fly up to 35,000 feet and then literally open the side of the airplane, the door, to allow the telescope to see directly out and take data and fly around for 10 hours at night so that you could observe and take data. And the reason you do that, of course, is because especially for infrared observing, you want to get as high as you can above the atmosphere, or as far up in the atmosphere as you can, to get good data. Which is why the space telescope that we have now, the James Webb Space Telescope, is so amazing, because it's, of course, outside the atmosphere completely. And it's also part of the reason why telescopes are on high mountains. But an airplane at 35,000 feet is way higher than any mountain, right? And so it's a great idea for infrared observing. However, it's a 747 flying around for 10 hours a night taking data. And anyway, I attended this science talk about this observatory that was coming online. And it was just an offhand comment in the talk, but the person speaking mentioned that one of the principal scientists for a camera for this observatory had stepped back from the project after working on it for years because he decided that he didn't want to be associated with the emissions of this flying observatory. Um, and this was 2009, and when I tell this story now, especially to young people, it's not a surprise to them that somebody would make a life decision based on climate change because young people today are doing this a lot. But at that time, it was really the first time that I heard about somebody that made a career choice, you know, allowed the issue of climate change to influence a career decision. Um, and I was at the time living in Chile, flying around for science meetings and travel the way astronomers tend to do. Um, and it just really hit me. It was kind of a wake up moment of like, this is a big problem and we need to stop pretending like it's not affecting us. We need to really, you know, I guess let it in, let it affect our lives and become more real for us. Um, and it made me think, what am I doing and what should I be doing and what can I be doing? And so that was kind of, you mentioned at the beginning, that we met at this climate reality event. And when I trained for climate reality with the Al Gore Project, um, in 2018, one of the things they have you do is everybody tells their sort of wake up moment or aha moment about getting involved in climate activism. And it's not everybody has one. I mean, some people come to it just kind of gradually, but most people, or at least a lot of people, do have sort of a moment where you just realize like we need to be doing more. And that was the moment for me. And I also like telling that story because that person obviously didn't make that decision with me in mind. He didn't even know me. But you never know the consequences, right, of your actions, and that butterfly wing effect of, just hearing that happen, hearing about that decision by that man, triggered something for me and set me on a trajectory that still is still, the question I asked today, what more can I be doing? But it really allowed me to sort of wake up to the idea that this this problem needs our attention. um, and that you can make big choices with it in mind because as we go into the future, we all are going to be making big choices with this in mind. It took a long time for a lot of us to wake up, but it's now hitting us all over the head. So
Mhm. Yeah, I think I just want to point out the beauty of that question. And it's such a critical reframe from a common question we hear, which is, well, what can I do? And it's exactly like that emoji on your phone, right? It's like, "Meh." And that's really, a big part of what drives me to tell stories like yours and share stories like yours is because we really have to look at that question because it is a disempowering question. And the question that you ask instead on what sounds like an almost daily basis is instead, what more can I be doing? And what I'm curious about with that is to hear more about how that evolution happened for you. I know that you've done amazing work with 350.org. You've trained at Climate Reality. You've worked with Scientist Rebellion. You've even been arrested twice in climate actions that you've done. And some there were moments where you leaped ahead in what you were doing. I'm sure that first time you were arrested probably may have felt like one of those. But I also see that, this is over now 10 years of your life, and you've learned and grown and become a different person as a result. And so I wonder, when you ask yourself this question of what more can I be doing, how does it feel energizing rather than, let's say, draining or even exhausting? Because burnout is a concern when it comes to this type of work too. So I'm curious, what really energizes you and drives you as you continue asking this question for 10 years now?
Yeah. Some of it may be personality. I've been willing to make big changes in my life, so I've never been sort of afraid of, like, well, let's just try something different. And when I left professional astronomy, when we moved to Portland, I originally thought I would get a job um, doing climate work. And I figured my science background and my management experience would land me in a job. And I looked for a while and I didn't actually find anything. And I started doing volunteer work sort of in parallel as I was looking. And then as it happened for me, I really got into the volunteer work, and I realized that where I am in my life, the career wasn't so important for me. I mean, I feel like I was in kind of a privileged place, that I was pretty stable financially, pretty far advanced career wise, as far as not like looking to climb any new ladders or anything like that. And so I felt like I could use that privilege to really just give my time and dive into the work. I did pick up teaching as a job instead, and I'm a part time teacher as well. But I dove into the volunteer work, just head over heels. And I've been so energized by the work and the people. It's just been an amazing journey and experience. I had no idea coming into it what I would be doing, or, who I would end up meeting and what would happen. It was all completely unplanned. Um, but I had heard of 350.org while I was still in Chile. That was one of the first actions I did in 2010. Was they There was something called 10-10-10. I remember, was a big global day of action, and 350 was behind that. And um, so then when I moved to Portland in 2014, I looked them up, and it turned out the Portland chapter was just getting started, which kind of surprised me. I figured they'd already be going strong, but they were just getting started. So I got in on the ground floor there and ended up working with them for years. And just the personal growth and education for me has been amazing. My worldview has opened up so much from stuff I didn't know I didn't know. That um, I've learned a lot more about climate justice, about social and racial justice. I've also learned a lot, and I try and learn more all the time, about indigenous wisdom, because that feels like such a big piece of our solution to this. Um, and just being around amazing people that have already dedicated their lives to it, both young and old, older activists that have been doing stuff like this for 50 years, and young activists that are 20 and 25 that are already just pouring themselves into it. Um, I think I've really, I could say, and it's sort of cliche, but it's also true, that, I'm motivated a lot by my children. I have two young adult children, and, worry about the future is a natural thing as a parent that drives me at some level. But I think the more selfish reason is, once I got into it, I've I've just been enamored by the people I've met and everything I've learned and the work that I've done, um, and the sense of doing something, the feeling of making a difference and having an impact. Even if it's small, you don't always see the impact or know right away. But like I was saying about the butterfly wing effect, you never know um, what the knock-on effects are going to be of something that you did, even if it feels like it wasn't like you do a rally or a march or something, and maybe it's not well attended, and you think, oh, that didn't feel like it was did much. But then it turns out, somebody new comes into your organization or your work, and then they end up doing amazing things, or so there's you we don't always know the impact, but there is a lot of impact in this work, and it's had a huge impact on me personally.
Yeah, it sounds like I see kind of a couple themes there, and one is that you're really living your own story. Just like you were so deeply impacted by this one comment that was made at a presentation about this observatory on an airplane. And now you really keep that as fuel to be like, well, I know it works because it worked on me. And so there's some power there. There's some similarity to what I'm doing here with these podcasts. Is, my moment of kind of that hinged my trajectory was in 2016 when I was asking big questions around what's next for me, what's next for the planet, what's next for anybody. And I heard two phrases, which was earth is your home, arts are your skill set. And I've been running with that since 2016, with everything in me, and it's taken so many twists and turns, and it's driven me to find out, well, if arts are my skill set, what are other people's skill sets, so that I can help point them in that direction and help facilitate in that way. So I really get that there is this power of sharing what worked for you, because you have that visceral experience.
Yeah.
And the other piece that I think is so key about what you said is the community. Like
Yeah.
these people that you've met that you probably wouldn't have in other circumstances within your life, and how they've intrigued you and taught you and built relationships with. And I know one of the things we connected on is the fact that one of the groups in particular that you are kind of constantly fascinated by is the artists that you work with. Particularly, I believe that there's students at different colleges like PNCA, and you can talk more about what that acronym means for people who don't know. But yeah, I'm curious, what is it that really intrigues you to bring the science of ecology and climate to colleges where that is not the focus? The focus is learning how to film and do graphic design and things like that. I would love to hear about that experience that you have and that community that you feel has developed around that.
Yeah. Well, and you and I met, at a climate reality event.
Mhm.
So I do feel like once you just start showing up, you just start doing stuff. It almost doesn't matter what you do, but you start showing up and you meet other people that are showing up, and you just start making connections, and you find amazing people. And I mean, that was how
Mhm.
you and I found each other too. Climate groups that I've worked with always have sort of art teams, and I'm not an artist, but I've dabbled with those folks just because it's fun to paint signs and do things like that. But a few years ago, it was actually during the pandemic, I think it was fall of 2020. I saw an opening for a science teacher at the Pacific Northwest College of Art, which is in downtown Portland. It's actually a college of Willamette University. Um, but it's an art school, an art college, and they were looking for a liberal arts science teacher, and I started teaching there, and I love it. It's been so great because I feel like, um, well, it's just really fun to teach art students, first of all. Creatives are amazing, and art students are just, yeah, they're just a joy to work with. They don't really care too much about science typically, but they but that's okay. They're curious, and that's the most important thing anyway. So I really enjoy the students there, and um the what I feel like is useful as far as me teaching them science is that art is so important in the educating the world and waking up the people of the world about this crisis. There's just no doubt. The scientists have known about this for decades. And if it was just a matter of scientists being able to, you know, find the right solutions and tell people, and then they happen, we would have we would be on a very different trajectory now. um, but that is not what has happened, and we're now 30 plus years into working on this climate crisis, and studying the science of it is only going to get us so far, right? We need to, as a society, sociologically, like, embrace the transformation that's necessary. And who better to, help affect culture and bring about a paradigm shift that we need than artists, like you said, the telling the story. It's all about story in the end. um, and so, what I feel like I try and do as a science teacher in an art school is give the artists, like, just enough science to be dangerous, right? Sort of. And, because they care about this, they've heard about climate change, especially, like I said, young people have been hearing about it, their whole lives. Um, and and they can be very depressed and discouraged from hearing how little our elected leaders are really doing to solve this, even as we are doing things. I mean, to be positive, I would say we are making progress, but it's so slow compared to the transformation that we need and the timeline that we need it to happen on. Um, but, culture shifts can be fast, right? Once they finally happen, they might take a while to get there, but then they happen. And this is something where we really need a culture shift. We can't just wait around for our governments to slowly implement the policies that we need, especially because they're really heavily influenced and corrupted by, fossil fuel industry and other sort of vested interests. But the people, the culture can change independent of that, and then that is really what drives our leaders. I read that somewhere that said that, our leaders don't lead, they follow, right? So people can lead, and artists have such an important role to play in that, probably the most important role. And so, yeah, I teach ecology and resilience. I also teach a course called Living on Planet Earth, and a lot of it is about, what's happening on our planet right now, and then inspiring, hopefully, the students to take some of that into their artwork and whatever they decide to do with their careers to really help move this needle that we need to move. But for me, apparently, it's it's a whole bunch of different things. So what's worked for me is to just keep trying new stuff and do new things. And, I've worked with probably at least a half a dozen different organizations doing different kind of jobs, from board members to speaker to, you know, teaching art students to being a treasurer and doing budgets. And, you just kind of keep trying different things. I feel like it's a buffet out there.
Yeah, I love that. I love your sense of curiosity. I love your sense of diving into the mystery. But I also appreciate your acknowledgement of, that there's certain things that some individuals can do and some can't, like the ability to get rested. Like you talked about that your kids are young adults now, but if your kids were still like young, like toddlers, that would be a much bigger commitment to make, and you're at a place where your life can allow for that. And I think that's another important part for us to all acknowledge in this journey is what are the sides of us that we can't do, where are our boundaries, or where are the things that we're not as good at and we need to rely on other people to help us with. And I think that's a good example too with you working at the college where it's focused on art students, and you acknowledge, okay, you can't teach science the way that you would teach it if you were teaching an astronomy class at a state college, to people that are majoring in that you have to adapt it for people. And I think acknowledging these sides of us that, I refer to them as our shadow sides, are really important too, because we can't just wish them away. We can practice them, we can grow with them, they can shift at different stages of our life. But I think that they are an important part to acknowledge just as much as the superpowers that we have, because it will guide us in the right direction. And I think your story is a wonderful example of that.
Yeah, I agree. And your whole concept of sort of this spectrum and these different types, um, recognizing our strengths and our shadow aspects, um, and then allowing other people to fill in the other pieces. One way that people get overwhelmed and discouraged here is that they somehow think that they can't solve the whole problem, and therefore they shouldn't can't do anything, and that's of course silly and crazy, because none of us are going to all by ourselves solve this problem, but we can have a huge impact, and we can rely on other people to do their piece and have an impact. I mean, I think the community aspect of it, and the really um, embracing everybody's strengths and also acknowledging everybody's challenges is allows us as a community to really not only make progress but also have stronger relationship, and really uh, just respect and honor our humanity, while we're also doing this important work. And I do feel like the the real direct action stuff that I tend to be involved in, um, one of the possibly sort of negative side effects of it, I think, is that people tend to think, well, I don't want to do that, and therefore, I can't do anything, or something, like people thinking that climate activism means, you have to go out and sit out on the street and get arrested or whatever. And that's just so not true. There's so many things to do. Even if you like being involved with direct action but don't want to be arrested, there's plenty of work to do that doesn't involve getting arrested. But even if you want to do something completely different, like, create films and podcasts, or become a speaker, or be a teacher, or go into politics, or there's many directions that activism can go, but I personally do think that the direct action thing is sort of a powerful piece right now, just because we're in the midst of really trying to um, actualize, manifest this shift that we need. So that's my main focus on that. But that doesn't mean there aren't plenty of other things to do.
Hmm. Yeah, and that brings us actually to the end of the hour. And my last two questions that I always like to sneak in here. And one of them, what you just said, fits in so well to this penultimate question, which is having this broad spectrum of community and worlds that you've interacted with, and environments and light signals and energy and all these things that you have these in-depth relationships with. I am curious how you would look at or define or have experience of this really important phrase that I think is critical in our movement towards climate justice, which is reciprocal relationships. And that
Mm.
can be human to human, that could be human to plant, that could be water to air, that could be light to energy. There's so many relationships out there. And I'm curious, with your broad spectrum of life experiences and knowledge, how do you look at that concept?
Mm. I The first thing that comes to mind with it is the indigenous idea of
Mm.
reciprocity,
Mhm.
which has really just come into my consciousness in the last few years. The
Mhm.
amazing, of course, bestseller by Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass, which is just such an amazing book, and I use it with my students, and um, and she talks a lot about reciprocity, and it's an idea, we talk about earth relationship, and in our human relationships, I think most people recognize reciprocity as a necessary part of a relationship, right? A give and take, a feeling that you don't want to feel that you're always the one giving, and you don't want to be the one that's always just getting stuff either, right? That would be an abusive relationship. So you need that reciprocity. And what I learned from Robin Wall Kimmerer and from other indigenous readings is that that's our should be our relationship to the earth as well, both as our humanity overall, our species, and even on an individual basis. I think she talks about the honorable harvest and the idea that um, Earth is not just here for us to exploit. It is we are an integral part of the planet, and everything is interconnected, and we need to take care of our home as much as our home takes care of us. Um, so that's where I see reciprocity, and I have to confess that it wasn't in my consciousness until just a few years ago. And it's so important. It makes so much sense that it's one of the joys, one of the things I'm grateful for that I've learned in the last few years.
Yeah, talk about a culture shifting book. That Braiding Sweetgrass had such a profound effect on our culture and understanding. And I think to many of us brought this idea of reciprocity to more than just the foreground, but a place that we didn't even remember, even if our own ancestors centuries ago had those relationships. It was
Yeah.
such an important book that I really honor how you tried to speak of it as it feels like it's continuing to unfold in you as you find, how do I actualize this, how do I do this on a day-to-day basis.
I think this whole sort of, I would call it kind of an indigenous renaissance, this uplifting of indigenous voices in North America, at least. Is so critical to all of us getting sort of the consciousness shift that we need to embrace the solutions in the right way, and to let the right solutions come forward, not just capitalist solutions, but really um, solutions that honor the interconnectedness of everything in our biosphere, and really look for solutions that are healing, which, yeah, that book was a huge step and that breakthrough, I think. Such a great
Definitely.
book.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that leads us to our very last question, which is, you you kindly allowed me to kind of take you on twists and turns, as I poked at your different answers and gave me the opportunity to be curious and explore with you. But I always want to make sure that I give one final chance to all of my friends here that join me on the podcast and ask, of all the things that we talked about, what is something that you wish I would have asked? What did I not touch on? What is important to you that we missed? What is something personal about you that you want people to know? Whatever angle you want, but what's one more thing you would like to make sure that we get to share before we leave for this time?
Well, you did a very good job, I have to say, because you've covered a lot. um, I think, hmm. I mean, we did touch on it, but I do think the personal growth and the rewards that come from this work, and I feel like too much when I talk to other people, they are focused on the sacrifices that we have to make, um, and there are sacrifices. We should be real, for especially those of us with privilege and with a lot of material wealth. Um, we need to cut down on our consumerism and our materialism. And there are sacrifices associated with that, but there's so much reward, that I think it's important to emphasize that. And this is not some painful, march across the desert. There's so much joy to be found, and so much beauty and life enhancing wealth that comes from sort of really examining our lifestyles and paying attention to what really matters, and paying attention to relationships, and doing work that is um, important and impactful, but just really embracing the beauty of this. And to be honest, one of the joys I've found is that there's a tremendous number of women working in this work. And coming from a science background, I've spent my whole career in male dominated fields for the most part, even when I was a computer scientist and then as an engineer and as an astronomer. And I find interesting as well as refreshing and joyful for me that I've mostly in most of the groups I'm in, it's dominated by women. And I think that's kind of an interesting insight in itself. And it's also been a source of joy for me to work with young people, to work with women, to work with just folks that are care so much about our planet and our future. So that's I think we really need to keep emphasizing the joy in this work.
Yeah, I almost hear a redefinition of the word abundance, from
Mm,
instead of from extractive abundance to collaborative, perhaps, or joyful abundance.
yeah. And regenerative, there's uh when you're not just burning up resources, the abundance comes from things that are replenishable, like relationships and um, storytelling and art. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Bernadette. I'm so glad that our worlds came together, and I look forward to continuing to weave and explore the mysteries together.
Thank you, Amber. I really appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.
Hey, Earthmate. How did that episode resonate? Did it stretch you, inspire you, or perhaps irk you? I'm here for it, so please reach out. Besides the socials, we have a community to practice with on our website, eartharchetypes.com, where more Earth archetypes can guide your path and become dear friends. A great place to start is the quiz to discover your type. Oh, and on your way, I'd love for you to hit the subscribe button. See you again soon.